Welcome to Don't Chuck It Up. I'm Chuck, a college counselor helping parents and educators navigate the college search and application process with clarity and confidence. Today, we are talking about military service academies. And again, because I am not an expert on this topic, I had to bring back Lisa. Welcome back, Lisa Hillhouse, an independent educational consultant who focuses on ROTC scholarships and military service academies. You probably heard her on our previous episode where we talked about ROTC scholarships, but because, Lisa, you're such an expert on military service academies, I had to have you back. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here.
I really appreciate you doing this episode with me and for our listeners. I mean, you were active duty Air Force and you also served in the Air Force Reserves for a total serve time of over 25 years. Thank you so much for your service to our country. I really appreciate all that you have done. So you have lived this, breathed this, walked this, and even worked in this, right? So why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. So thank you for the thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure to serve. I went through Air Force ROTC, so very similar to our last episode at the College of the Holy Cross, commissioned and went active duty. While I was in that program, I gained a college scholarship. So we talked about those last time, and of course, slots at the academies here. And then while I was active duty, worked as a logistician in personnel or human resources, and then taught Air Force ROTC at Berkeley. After I left the full-time military, went in the reserves, I helped run operations for Northern California at the Air Force Academy. So the work that I do with kids today is very reminiscent of what I did in the military. But I love having more time to work with more students one-on-one and help them kind of figure out their leadership journeys. So it's a great job and it's a really great path for the right kid.
And this is absolutely why I needed to have you on the show again, because you have worked in this field and lived in this field for really the vast majority of your life. And I'm just like, okay, I've gotten questions about military service academies. I'm like, all right, well, Lisa, you need to come back and help us talk about this again. So military service academies, what if your college education came with full tuition, a leadership laboratory, guaranteed employment after graduation, and the opportunity to serve your country? I mean, that sounds amazing.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. So the military service academies, there are 5 of them. There's 3 that are part of the Department of Defense. And so that is West Point, which is the first and oldest. There is the United States Naval Academy and the United States Air Force Academy. And then you have 2 that are a little bit smaller. And so first is the Coast Guard Academy, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. And then the Merchant Marine Academy, which is part of the Department of Transportation. It's a similar process and similar outcomes. There's some variations. I know we'll talk about those, but it's a chance for kids who want a really all-in, rigorous academics, leadership, military training program and want to serve their country when they leave college. So you're not looking for a low-key, minimal work, lots of downtime experience. You want quite the opposite.
Yeah. All right. So let's review some of these again. We've got the United States Naval Academy. So for those of you who are listening at the podcast, I am showing the websites to our YouTube watchers. The links to all these websites are available in the show notes for you to check out. But these are really the primary resources that you believe, Lisa, are a great place for people to start if they want to dive in and learn about these various opportunities, right?
Definitely. So if you go to the websites, they will talk you through the application process. They'll tell you about what's the minimum requirements to be eligible to apply. They'll talk about how do you obtain nominations, what is the fitness test, things like that. But there's also really great testimonies from cadets and midshipmen talking about what is it like to be at the Coast Guard Academy? What is life like as a midshipman at the Naval Academy? And then they each all have really great social media sites too with other things. And you also have admissions officer contacts for each of the academies on there. So maybe not every single solitary person in admissions, but it's a good place to get started and, figure out what you want to do, especially if you're younger, like an 8th grader or 9th grader too.
Yeah, absolutely. So after Naval Academy, West Point, I think, is probably one of the most famous places that people have heard of. And West Point focuses on which group?
Yes. So West Point is solely commissioning into the Army, whereas I didn't mention, but Navy commissions into the Navy and the Marine Corps. And yes, West Point is the oldest academy. It is also known really for many things, but one of them is civil engineering because when West Point was first started, there weren't enough engineers to build the country and protect the country. So that is kind of like what started that idea. Mhm.
Yeah. After that, on my screen, I have the Coast Guard.
Mhm. So Coast Guard is commissioning only into the Coast Guard. They are one branch that doesn't have ROTC, so the program where you're in a college. So the Coast Guard commissions most officers through the academy or their officer training school. And the smaller academies, such as Coast Guard and Merchant Marine, have about 1,250 students, whereas the larger academies are about 4,000 to 4,500 students. So the larger academies are D1 sports, the smaller D3 sports.
For the Merchant Marines,
So the Merchant Marine Academy is really kind of a hidden gem. And if you go on any of the Military Service Academy parent pages for parents and students looking at admissions information, people are always saying like, this is a hidden gem, nobody knows about it. So this is part of the Department of Transportation. There are a little bit more expenses to go there, but really nominal. You can apply for financial aid if you needed it. Students there have the option to either commission at the end of their time in the Naval Reserve, and then they're going to do some part-time duty to fulfill their 5-year service commitment. But if they're doing that, they're working in the maritime industry. So they could be working towards ship captain, they could be a logistician in a port, they could be security, IT. But the Merchant Marine Academy also allows you to compete to commission into any other branch. So you can go to the Space Force, you can become an Air Force pilot, you can compete to become a Navy SEAL, different things like that. So that's what's so unique about it is a maritime focused academy, but you have all that flexibility. So again, you're not necessarily going active duty to serve, but you could. Whereas the other academies, you're all going active duty and serving for a minimum of 5 years.
And that's one that I really find fascinating about the Merchant Marine Academy is that it's kind of a one size fits all as far as you don't know which branch you might want to serve in afterwards. This really is kind of a one place starter point and gives you that Merchant Marine connection. But you can go in any direction after that. So yeah,
Right.
this was the one that I was considering when I was in high school. Because I was
I
like,
love
oh,
that.
this is pretty cool. It's like you can go any direction, but yeah. All
Right.
right.
And sometimes, too, a lot of kids are interested in the Naval Academy. It's probably my most popular one for my students. But if they're looking at going into like working at sea, serving at sea, they absolutely should consider the Merchant Marine Academy and the Coast Guard Academy. So, sometimes kids don't know about the other two. Also, Merchant Marine Academy is in New York. West Point is in New York. Coast Guard Academy is in Connecticut. So you have 3 in close proximity. And then the Naval Academy is in Maryland and the Air Force Academy is in Colorado. So a lot of stuff in the Northeast. So if you had grown up in the Northeast, you'd be really well familiar with at least West Point, if not the others.
I'm saying, and you mentioned the last one, which is Air Force Academy, the one that's located in the Mountain Time Zone in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So the Air Force Academy is a younger academy compared to the big 3 Division I ones. And they are commissioning into the Air Force and also into the Space Force. And so something that's interesting right now, the Air Force Academy is working with Congress because they're going to pass the legislation that manages, what is the admission, admission numbers and different things like that. What's the mission? Like just helping direct it. So right now, the Air Force is asking to increase the size of the Air Force Academy to allow for more officers to go into the Space Force. So that's kind of exciting news. The Air Force Academy is a little bit smaller than West Point and Annapolis. And again, like Annapolis is commissioning into the Navy and Marine Corps. So this would kind of put them more in line with them.
I would say I've got some stories about all of these institutions. The Air Force Academy also happens to be right down the street from one of the best Olympic training centers in the United States. So
Yes,
if you'd like to be around Air Force Academy people and the Olympic athletes, it's Colorado Springs, Colorado. So yeah,
definitely,
they're all right there. All right.
definitely.
So that's a little brief overview. So what else do we need to know when we're thinking about these opportunities for students? So what are some things
Sure.
that are common amongst all of them?
Sure. So all of them are going to provide their tuition, their room and board, things like that. Students will have to pay for their uniforms, haircuts. In some cases, they might pay for books or computers, depending on the academies. Um, at the academies, you have a monthly stipend or allowance that you're paid. The one school that's a little different is the Merchant Marine Academy. So you're not getting that money unless you're doing your sea term. So unless you're out at sea. Each of those, again, is commissioning you as an officer after graduation. So you are a leader and a manager from day one. You're, outranking 85% of the military who are enlisted. You are again going active duty, with the exception of Merchant Marine. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, for 5 years. If you have certain jobs like you're a pilot or a navigator, you could have a longer time commitment. And then you are also going to all have a Bachelor of Science degree when you finish college. So you could major in political science or aerospace engineering, but you're still getting a Bachelor of Science degree with a strong, STEM undercurrent.
So what makes the academies unique and different than, let's say, another, like a full ride experience for a D1 athlete that might have a lot of these expenses paid for? So how is an academy experience different from that?
Sure. So when you go to an academy, you're really focusing on leadership and management and becoming like the best leader you can be, but also having this liberal arts education, but, you know, with that STEM focused. So maybe an athlete could have a lighter course schedule. If you are at an academy, whether you're a D1 or D3 athlete, or you're doing some other athletic role, you are still taking all the classes every day. You might be on the road traveling with your team, but you might get back at midnight, and the next day you're getting up at 6 a.m. to go to breakfast and continue. So you still do that military training, say, as an athlete. The students there, they can't graduate in 5 years. They are 4-year programs. I have occasionally had a student who graduated a semester late, but maybe they had like a major injury, like a knee reconstruction, and couldn't do all the physical requirements. But again, you don't get that extra year of eligibility. You do have the chance to try out for any team when you get there as well. And the smaller academies, Merchant Marine and Coast Guard, a lot of people walk on to a brand new sport because they're smaller schools. There's just a lot more opportunities. So you're definitely getting that physical fitness training. You're definitely getting the military training at each school. That's going to include character and skill building, and just what are the things you're going to need to do in the military, like know how to deploy, have weapons training, have, combat skills, lots and lots of different things. And then again, you're doing your academics. So full-time student and rigorous. So the big thing with the academies is you really need to be all in if you want to go there. Like, you are giving 110% all the time. And my students who've gone and have been D1 athletes, which is many, but not all of them, they'll say something's got to give. Like, I can be great at athletics and really excel at academics, but I'm not as good with the military. I've sent kids to academies that have gone on to med school, and they kind of said, like, I needed to really focus on the military and the academics, but like I didn't get to do, the sports and things that I wanted to do, just because you can't give everything to everyone, and everything. I would say very few people ever go there and say, this wasn't that hard. Most people say, this is the hardest thing I've done.
I was going to say, like, what are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Like, come on.
barely anyone. There's always those couple people who are at the top of the rank with the order of merit and grades and activities and military training. But no, everyone's going to struggle with something. And it is they are great places to be from, but sometimes being there is really challenging because, you may not be a math person, but you're still taking differential equations and aeronautical principles and different things like that. Whereas maybe you're going to Smith College, and if you don't want to take something quantitative, you don't have to. So it can be a very different experience.
Right. Well, and I think
Right.
this is really also different in our last episode talking about ROTC scholarships and the application process for that, which does
Right.
have quite a bit of nuance to it and some other things you need to do. Applying to the military service academies and going this route is it's almost like getting the tattoo, because you're just like, okay, I'm fully committed on this. I have to get
Right.
recommendations. I've got to do all this physical training and all the paperwork. I just feel I'm worried that there are some students and families out there that are just like, well, we'll apply to West Point just to see if we get in, like, and I'm just
Like
going,
Stanford.
do you know what the application entails? Like, this isn't
Right.
just it isn't like you're on the Common App and you're just going to check a box and be like, well, yeah, add West Point as another option. Like these service
Right.
academies are really looking for the best of the best who are going to be the future leaders of our military. And so I think students need to put this as, is this a top priority? As you said, are you fully committed to this type of thing? And many people who look at the service academies are kids who've had relatives who have also gone through this process. I'm not saying that that's a requirement, but I think some of the students who ask about these service academies had some other connection to them. So they go, I've heard about this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
these are intense.
there's so many things that you could jump off from that. Like maybe a child will or a teen will want to go to the Air Force Academy because they want to fly, or they saw Top Gun and the remakes and they want to fly,
Right.
for the Navy or Marine Corps. But there's other ways to fly. It could be through ROTC. It could be through the civilian path. It could be go to college and get, work on your ratings and hours. So you have to want to go because you want to serve. And with the military, you're not always going to get the job you want or the assignment you want. Maybe the timing won't always be what you hoped it
Right.
would be. So there is that whole selfless component. So you can't go because you want to be a pilot only. You have to want to be a leader first and serve as an officer. And only 1% of the US population is in the military. So it is a really small, really
Mhm.
select group. But also, for the students there, we talked about some of the challenges, but there's also this immense camaraderie. Like these are your brothers and sisters in arms, they are your family. During COVID, one of my students was at the Air Force Academy, and commissioning was online. And so parents couldn't come to do the pinning of the bars and swearing in.
Right.
And it was really traumatic for the parents. And so um, I was talking to one of my students and I was like, I'm so sorry your family can't be there. And they're third generation military officer.
Mhm.
And they said, it's fine, as some college students would say. But they said, my family is here too. Like my classmates are my family. So, I don't think their mom would have said that, but
Right.
you experienced so much with these people. And also, too, there's unparalleled access, to world-class professors, to real-world research that's being used by NASA, the DoD, the State Department. You have chances to, go abroad in the summer to do medical research, to, go present at conferences. Like there's endless opportunities. And at many colleges, there's some wonderful opportunities, but this is like for everyone. Like you just put yourself out there and say,
Mhm.
I want to go to this, international conference. So it really gives kids just such great access. But as you said, like nothing's free, right?
Right.
Like you are giving up that
This is
freedom you
hardcore.
have while you're there, unlike our TC or other college students, and you are paying with service after.
Yeah.
You know, so I think for us, we're like 5 years is nothing. I think for a high schooler, 5 years is a really long time.
Yeah. Are you kidding me? Like, they're operating in a day-to-day model. For us, we're like 5 years is okay, whatever. It'll be
Mhm.
fine, but they're operating in a day-to-day model. So
Right.
can we help our listeners think about the various pathways that this can
Mhm.
happen in? So we're talking today and focusing on service academies. Our last episode,
Mhm.
we talked about the ROTC at a civilian college
Mhm.
experience.
Hmm.
There's also senior military colleges, and I have a question about
Right.
that experience as well. So can you
Perfect.
help our listeners understand these various paths?
Sure. So the service academies, you could almost equate it to it's like getting into an Ivy League, right? It's going to be very few people have that opportunity. You're going to have to beat out a lot of really great competition. They're looking for a unique set of talents, right? Athletics, leadership,
Hmm.
academic prowess. Um, Whereas that's going to be 250 to 1,000 cadets or midshipmen getting commissioned each year in that branch. You're also going to have that much lengthier admissions process.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that more later. So, ROTC is generally the largest commissioning source, except for Coast Guard. And then you are at a civilian college. So, there are hundreds of colleges with ROTC, either on
Hmm.
the campus for that one or more branches or through crosstowns so students can walk onto that program. So you didn't have to have everything by the nomination deadline or the medical deadline. And that allows students to start college with ROTC or at it. It's a chance for them to get scholarships and, go active duty.
Hmm.
If you are at a senior military college, it is the in between state. So, whereas college students in ROTC could live off campus, they could commute, they could have a part time job, they could be, doing club soccer or not doing club soccer. At a senior military college, you are living in the dorms all 4 years with your classmates. You are wearing your uniform during the school day, so 6 a.m. till about 3 p.m. You have an Army leadership model, even if you eventually want to go into a different branch, like, say, Navy or Marine Corps. And while you're there, you are having like those daily, weekly room inspections and PT many mornings of the week. And your days are filled and structured similar to the academy. So, like, I had a boy who applied to West Point. He was waitlisted. He got an Army ROTC scholarship and he went to Norwich University, which is a senior military college in Vermont. And so for him, that was closer to what the West Point experience would be. But senior military colleges, most of them also have students who are not in the cadet corps of cadets. So, like, Norwich has nurses who aren't in that program and security studies majors and so on. A couple of the others people might know, the Citadel and VMI in the South. Virginia Tech is another one in the South. You also have a women's leadership program that's in Virginia. Mary Baldwin is another program,
Oh, yeah.
and then Texas A&M is the last one. So probably one of the most well-known ones.
So that is a specific group of colleges, the senior military colleges, that are kind of like a hybrid between
Right.
the service academies and quote unquote other types of colleges that way. Where did
Right.
I'm curious. I'm gonna ask a question that you're probably not expecting, but like the merchant marines, a lot of the maritime colleges and universities, they're either fully merchant marine or they are both a mix of merchant marines and civilians on the same campus. So are
Mhm.
those also senior military colleges, or is that something completely different?
They are not, but that is a great question. So I believe there's seven maritime academies like Mass Maritime,
Yep.
Maine, Texas A&M, Galveston, so on, Cal Maritime. Those programs are state schools and they are maritime academies, so they're getting special funding for those opportunities. Each of them have ROTC programs either on the campus or through a crosstown exchange, but not necessarily all of the branches. Like Cal Maritime, you can go to Berkeley and do any of the ROTC. But at Texas A&M, Galveston, it's just Navy ROTC. So that doesn't always work out as kids want it. But that's a chance to have a very hands-on maritime focused job. So like those schools are known for like marine biology, marine
Yep.
engineering, transportation systems, things like that. So yeah, and then also lots of kids go there who aren't going to go in the military too.
Right.
Like there's a huge need right now to expand our maritime industry, and so a lot of money is going into that. And the Merchant Marine Academy is part of the one of the beneficiaries of that to like just have even more current, stronger maritime folks because that's part of keeping our global systems going and part of our defense too. Mhm.
Yeah, I had a kid this year who did not want to do the military route, but he wanted to be at one of the maritime institutions. And I quickly noticed that most of the maritime institutions have a strong military connection, obviously,
Mhm.
makes sense. So I was just like, oh, wait, which classification are these under? So these would be
Right.
basically ROTC colleges that happen to have a strong maritime focus.
Or civilian colleges with a strong maritime focus
Yeah,
with ROTC. Yeah,
yeah, awesome.
definitely.
Yeah,
And yeah, and surprisingly, the maritime programs aren't that difficult to get into compared to like an academy. Some of the senior military colleges are very accessible. Some are more difficult. So, like the more difficult would be Virginia Tech and Texas A&M.
right. Yeah, I've
Right.
I've I've been talking up a lot of the maritime type programs because they seem to be more accessible, and it is still
Mhm.
a great service opportunity to be involved in the military. But yeah, I think again, people have heard of West Point, and they don't realize like West Point is like trying to get admitted to Harvard. It's sure great, you can go for it, but like that's going to be hard. We need to come up with other plans. So even as you're helping kids who are military focused, military
Mhm.
driven, you want them also to have a variety of plans for this
Right.
process, right?
I do. I do. So families will come to me and the student will tell me their why they want to go to an academy or serve or ROTC. I always feel like the academy is something that it has to be 110% their own.
Yes.
As you said, they are doubling the workload to apply to a college with the academy process. ROTC itself is a little less work to apply to that process, but they, need to know what they want to do. And I think it's really hard when you're 16, 17, 18
Right.
to see what it's going to be like. And, you think, oh, I really, want to go to the Naval Academy. It's beautiful. It's a great area, so much heritage and so on. I love the sea. I love sailing. But they don't always realize what that lifestyle and that, is gonna feel like. I always say, if you're looking at academy, like you have to consider ROTC. And sometimes we'll start the academy process and kids will be like, this is more than I wanted, or I feel like I could serve by doing ROTC, or maybe I want to just try ROTC when I get to college.
Mhm.
So we always have those conversations because, again, your interests and things change. But like the plan A for a lot of kids is I want to go to a service academy. The plan B is I'll apply for the ROTC scholarship. Plan C is I will walk on to ROTC. There's a plan D that a lot of kids look at with the academies. And so that is the preparatory schools and the foundation scholarships. So the prep schools are Army, Navy, Air Force have their own preparatory school. The Naval Academy will take some kids for Merchant Marine and Coast Guard. And then there are private preparatory schools. So private meaning they can be a public school or a private institution, but they're like a post-grad year.
Mhm.
So students can be funded by an academy because they want to have them come back the next year and start their 4 years, or students can self-prep. So meaning I will go to New Mexico Military Institute for a year and pay my own way. So some of these students are getting college credit, some they're not. Georgia Military College is a really well-known one that has really great outcomes. But when I worked at the academy, we would say, like, we're saving spots to send kids to our prep school. We're saving spots to send kids to these, foundation preparatory years. And then we'd say, if we didn't fund it for you and you really want to come to an academy, go to the best school you got into that's affordable,
Mhm.
that has, ROTC for your branch. Go in there that year and reapply to the academy. I would say the majority of kids who do that are like, I'm super happy in Notre Dame. I don't need to reapply, you know,
Right.
or I'm at the University of Arizona in the Honors College and I'm doing really well. And I didn't medically qualify in time, but now I'm qualified and I do want to stay here and, get to do my other things like playing club water polo, things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And as you and I know, we're working with teenagers, and teenagers have a hard time figuring out what they want to have for breakfast tomorrow. And we're trying to get them to plan, several years into the future. So
Right.
yeah, they can shoot for the service academies, but then maybe there is a better option that comes along
Mhm.
the way as we go through this. I also think
Mhm.
you bring up the point that working with the admissions officers that are connected to these programs and locations is always very helpful. I always tell
Right.
families, like, there are people like you that are very, very knowledgeable, but eventually, if you're looking at the Air Force Academy, you're going to have to talk to the admissions people at the Air Force Academy,
Right.
and
Right.
they know that you are reaching out. I think there's this hesitation, like, oh, I don't want to interrupt them because they're military. I'm like, well, they're still admissions officers, even though they're military, so they're still out there to be helpful.
And I would say, maybe the few years preceding COVID and a few years after, I felt like kids really didn't have those social skills where they wanted to email or call or meet
Right.
people in person. But I feel like teenagers now are getting a little better at that, where they're feeling a little more comfortable with reaching out. And the admissions officers at the academies, there's so many of them, but
Right.
they really want to help kids, and they're there because they're passionate about that academy. They went to that academy, and they're there to be role models and say, hey, I went to the prep school, or hey, I enlisted first and then came here, and now I'm serving. So like me, like they want to find the best kids, and they want to like help them get in and achieve their dreams. So they shouldn't feel bad about reaching out and asking questions. Yes, but it needs to be the student, not the parent.
I'm going to repeat that again. It needs to be the student, not the
Yes.
parent reaching out.
Right.
We are
Right.
trying to help them become good, independent young people. So we need to get them to start doing the reach out
Mhm.
for them. This is a great transition to let's talk about what does admissions look for at the military service academies and some of these more selective programs. So let's first dive in here. So we basically got five-ish areas that admissions needs to look at: academic, leadership, physical fitness, medical qualification, which is separate than physical fitness, and then also
Mhm.
the nomination process. So
Right.
let's dive into the admissions, starting off with academic profile.
Absolutely. So the academies are looking for kids who have a strong college prep curriculum. So they're looking at the context of your school, but also if your school has no honors or AP and you're at the top of that class, how else are you challenging yourself?
Yeah.
Again, it's also the context of the family. Maybe you live in a rural area, commute an hour to school, and work on your family farm too. So, how I'm looking at your files a little different than a suburban kid, right?
Mhm.
They want to see that you have strong English, math, science. You're in that fourth or fifth year, of those activities. They love things like unusual foreign language proficiencies, unusual cultural experiences, being well traveled. They are going to all look at standardized test scores. Scores really matter. So, super scoring, taking multiple tests, taking them early and often. And then they want to see what your teachers say about you, typically your English, math, and science teachers, generally from 11th grade. So, they're looking at all those different areas there. And again, they need you because every academy has some comparable classes.
Mhm.
Freshmen take, calculus, chemistry, physics, computer science, English composition. That's probably the easier one. So if you've never had those in high school or you haven't had them at an accelerated higher level, you're not going to do well there. Right. So they just want to set you up to succeed. So hard places to get in, but once you're there, they'll do everything they can to help you get through.
But I
Right.
think I think that's important that we talk about the academic profile coming in because, again, I don't know if every student realizes that there's a heavy academic component to the
Mhm.
military services academy. I think some kids think, oh, it's just military training. I don't have to worry about all of this class stuff. I'm serious. They were like, what do you
Right.
mean I have to do calculus? I'm like, no, it's the military service academies.
Right.
You're probably
And
gonna
a
have to do
foreign
calculus.
language,
Right.
right? Maybe a strategic one, lots of different things, engineering for sure. Yeah. So, again, kind of prepping with those challenging courses. And then what you want to study, the academies are probably about 60% or more, 70% STEM majors
Yeah.
with like the incoming class. So they do look at that, but they also know that you could change when you get there. So Coast Guard and Merchant Marine have less majors. They're smaller academies than the big three.
Mhm.
And of course, there's all just different kinds of minors and some really interesting things like space warfare, cybersecurity, war and peace studies, different things that have to do with how experiential and hands-on these programs are. But no, you can't be having a senior year with three classes, right? So Many of my students are doing summer classes so they can fit in computer science or another year language or, more math, things like that.
Yep. This is why you need to check out the admissions websites and talk to the admissions officers because they can help you understand what are they
Hmm.
looking for. This is different than what the high school graduation requirements are. This is military service academy. This is what they're looking for.
Right.
So outside of academics, obviously
Mhm.
leadership is important because that is a big reason for the military service academies is to create strong new leaders. So what are
Right.
they going to look for in the admissions process for leadership?
So the goal of every academy is to build leaders of character. So there's forms that you have to fill out talking about arrests, any civil involvements, any drug use, different things like that. They want to have kids with, you know, as clean as can be backgrounds, right? And if there's a small mark on there, like, did you learn from it? Or were you Are you remorseful? Are you only going in a different direction? They look at lots of different things. So, leadership, again, context to school and family. Maybe you're raising siblings, right? Maybe you are working to help support your family. Like, I've definitely had kids like that. Maybe you don't have to have a job because your parents can cover things, but are you volunteering, right? And are you giving back and serving others? Of course, there's all the things like varsity athletics and team captains, and that's great. But sometimes you're excelling in an activity that doesn't have a team. Like maybe I've had a student who did road racing and did 100-mile races and did raise money like thousands and thousands for charity, right? And so that was how they were getting their athletics. Lots of kids will go into scouts, so Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, ideally like to gold, or
Yep.
Eagle Scout. But then there's the military auxiliary programs like
Mhm.
Civil Air Patrol, Sea Cadets. Those are really popular. I also have a lot of students who will do things like Young Marines, or maybe they're doing search and rescue teams. Maybe they're doing police cadets. So, different things that are adjacent in that space of emergency preparedness, leadership, service. Work, if kids can do it, is really important. I don't see enough kids working and volunteering, in my personal opinion.
Yep.
Just getting those life skills. And then also, how are you tying things into what you want to do for your career? So you tell me you want to be, marine pilot, but like you're not physically fit. You don't know much about aviation. You haven't gone and done a self-study ground school, right? Like it's expensive to take flying lessons. Not everybody can do that.
Right.
But could you be volunteering at the glider port? Could you
Mhm.
be interning at a local small airport? Could you start an aviation club at your school? So, what are you doing to get yourself closer to where you're trying to go? So, I really try to brainstorm with kids a lot. How can we get close to that? And then also, you're meeting mentors and different things like that. So, quantifying what you've done and doing like two, three things and doing them really well.
The next two are obviously extremely critical and go together, which would be physical fitness, this a physical fitness assessment, and the medical qualifications.
Mhm. Yes. So for the academies, use the candidate fitness test, the CFA. Coast Guard has their own test. And so the physical fitness test is super challenging. Kids think I'm a varsity football player, I'm the captain, I'm fine. I can't tell you how many varsity athletes and some captains who failed this test. I had one last year. It's all these different components. So, do you have the upper body strength? Do you have the speed? Do you have the flexibility? So this is something that kids have a chance to start practicing for early,
Yeah.
ideally in their junior year, and take at the start of senior year when their application opens. Um, Again, too, are you doing team activities? Are you doing things where you're communicating, building spirit, where you're competitive? And that's where the sports come in. And then the medical qualifications, this is where a lot of kids get lost in this process. And so at least a quarter of students fail the medical exam. Sometimes it's something so serious that they're never going to give you a waiver or approve it, and your
Right.
application's closed. Like, there was a student, that family that came to me, and their son had schizophrenia. And I'm like, that is never going to fly. Like, I'm
Right.
sorry. I don't make the rules. I just can tell you that's not going to medically pass. Um, there could be other issues. So I always want to say if a student's on accommodation, so extra time, if they have, you know, medicine for ADHD, medicine for anxiety, depression, other things, like that. Learning differences, mental health issues are big medical disqualifiers. It doesn't mean you will never get medically qualified, but it really has a long timeline of being without medication or accommodations or therapy. So a lot of kids get disqualified with that because it's a big hurdle to get over. But also there's things that disqualify kids, like they may not realize like they're colorblind. Maybe it's mild. That is a really big deal with Navy and Coast Guard in particular, and somewhat with Marine. Maybe they don't realize they have some night blindness or some eye defect that never bothered them before. But there could also be they had asthma as an older teenager. That's going to be disqualified. They might have a peanut allergy. So the military is trying to say we need to go anywhere and do anything ultimately on a moment's notice, and we can't not deploy you to the Middle East because of your breathing problems, right?
Right.
So again, lots of good kids get disqualified for the medical. And jumping back to the fitness, if an academy thinks your score's too low, they'll usually give you one chance to retake the test, like 30 days. And if it's not better, they'll close your file. So it's not like applying to Rutgers and I meet the standards. It's a really high bar for kids.
Yeah, and I distinctly remember for the physical fitness assessment when I was in high school, one of our top wrestler, football player, athletes, like the dude that I was like, okay, you're going to go into the military, like he had to basically hire a private coach to help him prepare for the candidate fitness assessment because it was asking very particular skills that even though he was very athletic, he had to be able to do certain skills to a certain speed or length or size or whatever they're assessing. And like I was like, wow, if he has to hire someone like that, these are pretty specific. So
what's going to happen to us?
Right, exactly. I'm like, I'm not passing that. So I think again, when you're looking at military service academies, this is another component that students and families don't think about, and they kind of put it off till the last minute, but you need to prepare for it. Same thing with the medical qualification thing. If there's something that you're concerned about, you're best to talk about that with the admissions people early and get it addressed, so then you can plan for it. As you said, you can be off medication, some of them for an extended period of time, and then you would get through the medical qualification, and admissions can help you understand that, and you can be like, oh, okay, that's what I need to do. All right, now I know, like, I think there's a worry, like, if I ask the question, I'm disclosing something that I shouldn't disclose, and I'm like, well, that's going to come out. They
opened a file with Chuck's name on it.
Yeah, well, but it's going to come out somewhere, so you might as well, talk about admissions now, so then they're aware of it. They can, if you can get over the assessment and get assessed in the positive direction, they'll ignore the fact that it happened if they are allowed to. So, like, yeah, if you can get through the physical fitness exam, whatever you did before the assessment doesn't count.
Right. And as early, so a lot of times I'll do consults with families, and especially junior year, I'm like, let's lay out all these places that could be pain points for you, and let's be proactive. Like, do we need a breathing test, because of your asthma? Do we need to, do some more exploration for these other areas? There are definitely kids who get waivers for different things. And again, it's what is the quality of the student, if it's waiverable, because some things can go up to like DODMERB, the medical people will say, this is, you're qualified or you're not. They'll ask for more information if it's a waiverable condition. Sometimes they'll come back to the academy and say, do you want to push farther for it? So if it's your 3.0 student with a 20 ACT, probably not. There have to be something really spectacular about that student, because that's just not the kid who's going to, on average, succeed there. But there's also waivers that the superintendents of the academies can give, but, that's on them. Like, am I willing to take a student with a heart condition? And like, what if something happens while they're here? So it's not over till it's over, but there are timelines, and you really need to be medically qualified by March to early April to be reviewed for admission. And at that time of the year, like, most appointments come out that January through March. So there's not a lot of spots left. And sometimes the clock just runs down because kids aren't proactive enough with the medical.
Right. And the other big component that students and parents forget about is the nomination process. So this
Yes.
is a key factor that makes military service academies stand out from just a typical. I think some families think this is just like a letter of recommendation that they would send to a college through Common App. And I'm going, no, this is
I wish.
yeah, right. This is next level. So talk to us a little bit about what is the nomination process.
Sure. So 4 of the 5 academies require a congressional nomination. You just need one nomination for the academy you're applying to, but you want to throw everything out there and try to get, more than one because you might be in a very competitive district.
Mm-hmm.
A congressperson is your best shot because you are one of many students in their area. There could be 3 students in your area who are applying to all the academies. There could be 150 students applying to all the academies. So your local congressperson is where you start. Then your 2 state senators. There's a backup last chance place for most kids, all applicants, which is the vice president. And so the service academies work the vice presidential nominations. So if I applied to West Point and I already have a nomination from my congressperson, and then I got one because my mom is in the military, so I have a presidential nomination, I'm not going to apply for that vice president. They're going to save that for someone else. So like I have a student who is a dual citizen from Europe, and they got a vice presidential nomination, right? So you can kind of see it's these unusual cases.
And I want to confirm, every student only needs one nomination, right?
So but it's for that academy you're applying for, right?
Right.
So
they can either get one from a House of Representatives person, a senator, and then you said last resort would be the vice president of the United States, the VP of the United States, or the president of the United States, correct?
So the president is only for military affiliated students. So like my children could have done it because I was a career officer. If I had been serving at least 8 years, like they could also qualify. But there's other folks who can get it through the president, but it's usually related, like a parent was killed in action or other things like that. There's also Secretary of the Service. So for example, if you are in Marine ROTC at Arizona State, you can get a nomination from the chancellor of your school. So it's a special ROTC one. If you are active duty Navy, you can get one from the Secretary of the Navy. So again, these are not their typical high schoolers, but there are some one-off things. There's also junior ROTC units that are distinguished. So the top percentage, they can give you a nomination. So we want to go with every source because if I'm only applying to one academy, that's not so hard. I need one nomination. But maybe I'm applying to 3 academies, and I need one for West Point and for Air Force and for Merchant Marine. Some of your senators will not allow you to request more than one nomination from them. Some will say rank your academies, and then these offices for Congress, senators, etc., they are checking with the academy. Do they have an application, and is it complete? And so they're not messing around. It's gotten a lot stricter with that. Something else, the Merchant Marine Academy, you can't go use a presidential nomination for them, but you can go to the Secretary of Transportation. So that's kind of a one-off little thing because they're under the Department of Transportation. Also, for the Merchant Marine, barely anyone knows this, but you can go to another congressman in your state. So if I'm Georgia 14, I could go to Georgia 1 and ask for it, but it's like one other congressman. So Merchant Marine's a little different. And then Coast Guard does not use nominations. So that is a very special thing about them. They also have early action and regular decision deadlines, whereas the other academies either have one deadline or different deadlines for different students, which is Air Force. But, Coast Guard's like, hey, you apply by October 15th, we will give you an answer by late December. So there's something super nice about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot for people to keep in mind between the nomination process and the nomination application, the medical review, the fitness testing. There's really a lot of pieces in addition to just your standard academics and things that you're doing in high school and leadership. So
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of pieces to put together. That's why I love the fact that you're out there and available for families to work with if they need some one-on-one coaching through this whole process, because some people do. Others can handle this on their own, but I know some
Right.
people definitely utilize your knowledge, skill set, and background as well. So um, I think I want to jump into when and how to start preparing. So,
Mhm.
and then maybe we'll circle back to some other stuff. But so when should students and parents start preparing?
Sure. So I would say the earlier the better. So one thing we didn't touch on this last idea was that there's also an interview for most academies.
Oh yeah.
And so that's one of the things we also prepare. But I would say as soon as a student's interested, I would talk to someone. It could be an academy admissions rep, it could be me, it could be looking around for people in their community, some other officers. I find that the kids who are most successful are really starting to think about this in eighth grade. So like if a family reached out to me, we do an introductory session. We talk about, what are the things we need to be building? Our leadership experiences, our military exposure. What about the academics? And really just like an hour in eighth grade. In
Mhm.
ninth grade, I'll meet with kids 2, 3 times max and just how are we doing with these goals? Sophomore year, kids really need to be focused on, can I get to those higher level classes that I want? Am I applying to military summer programs?
Mhm.
Am I, building my volunteering, my work experience? When they get to be a junior, they really need to be locked in on that testing. So a lot of my sophomores are prepping that summer between those 2 years. And then junior year, just like non-military students, more challenging courses, more
Right.
leadership roles. Junior year is a great time to be really working on that fitness. And again, if you don't have a program like a sport or activity that gets you a lot of that fitness exposure, like this is a time maybe you could walk on to the, cross country or track and field team and start,
Mhm.
building up for that. Um, Junior year is also a great time if you haven't been to the campuses to visit them. And so, like Naval Academy does an overnight visit for some students.
Mhm.
Each academy does it a little different. By the time you get to that summer after junior year, we are doing nominations. We are doing applications for the academy. We're doing essay prep and, essay work, interview prep. So every year it's building and building. So it's, kids can come to me in October and we can still have a really great outcome. But now we're dotting I's, crossing T's, doing interview prep. Like we can't change that course history. We can't remediate something. We can't, there's not a lot of time left for, test changes.
Right.
So just the earlier, the better.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I It's really hard and really stressful, I think, for you and I when families come to us really late in the game and they want to do something like this. Is
Mhm.
it still possible? Yes. Is it going to
Mhm.
be a lot of stress and a very tight schedule? Yes.
Mhm.
So
Right.
that's a really challenge with all this. And I always agree with what you're saying with your advice is make sure you have a plan B, a plan C, and maybe even a plan D, so that
Mhm.
you have different levels of commitment and you really can find the right place or places that may fit you best.
Right.
And don't put all your eggs in one basket, please, because that's
Right.
always a challenge.
It
Um,
is. And occasionally you'll see somebody who will say, like, this isn't the kids I work with, but a student will say, I only applied to West Point. That was my only plan. And if it
right.
didn't work, I was going to go to community college and apply again. And I have seen that anecdotally, happen. But, as they build their civilian school lists, like we're trying to focus on where you could do ROTC. And when we talk about ROTC, sometimes students are like, I only want an academy. It's like more elite, it's more intense, it's more prestigious, it's going to give me better opportunities. You're going to have similar opportunities from the different sources. But when I ran nomination boards, if you didn't know what ROTC was, I think you didn't do your research.
Mhm.
And if you told me, like, I only want an academy, now I'm digging deeper. Like, what's the reason? Like, do you want prestige for your family? Do you only want to like quote unquote free, education?
Right. Right.
And if you don't have a good reason, like the interviewer for the academy and the nomination board people and admissions asks, are you applying to ROTC? So you look like you are not all in. And of course, you don't want to lie. Sometimes there's some reasons kids are not applying, but if they really want to become an officer, they should definitely be looking at it.
I think that's all awesome advice. In the instance of time, I want to jump into some myths and, kind of see what your reactions are to these. So, one
Okay.
of the biggest myths, I think, when kids ask about the military service academies and they're thinking military service academies, is that you have to want to go to war, and that's part of
Mhm.
going into military service academy.
Right. So I would say to you, if you ask any military member, officer enlisted, like, do we want to go to war? We're peacekeepers, right? And we want to maintain peace. We know when we go to war, we're losing resources, which the most important being our soldiers, sailors, etc.
Mhm.
So you might hear some people like after 9/11 that purposely went in the military, for that, but generally, no, like we train to deter
Right.
war. Mhm. And while you're in ROTC or an academy, you're a full-time student. You're not
Yeah.
leaving because a conflict started with another country.
I think the other big myth that I hear, another one, is that only recruited athletes get in because this is where we see a lot of the military service academies is on
Right.
TV for
Right.
athletics. So there's this perception and a myth, I'm assuming, that only recruited athletes get in.
Right. So the bigger three academies, Army, Navy, Air Force, about 25% of their class are recruited athletes. At the smaller academies, it could vary, but typically a little less.
Mhm.
So no, it's not everybody. And recruited athletes still have to get nominations and do interviews
Right.
and do all those other things, have the test scores, etc. So you might get a faster admission review and decision, but you are still having to have, meet high standards. Sometimes academically, they're going to a preparatory school. And that's,
Mhm.
at one of the academies, and that's very common. But that's not the only people there. But everyone needs to be athletic enough to do like the swimming and the martial arts and the boxing. And again, each semester you have something in rural, varsity, club sports and activities.
And there's still students that don't pass the physical fitness assessment, even if they're a
Mhm.
recruited athlete. I've seen that happen as well. They're like, "Oh, I'm an athlete."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Nope,
Yeah.
it's not an automatic pass."
Right. And I had a student at one of the academies who got injured and it was a slow recovery. And then they were under the gun to pass the CFA for that term.
Hmm.
And they didn't pass it the first time. And that's a huge amount of pressure on them because if
Yeah.
you fail a couple of times, you could be, discharged. Right. So again, you got to be, athletic.
Another big myth is that it's only for perfect students. Like these students
Mhm.
are literally practically, you know, the perfect clones of what's out there. So I believe
Right.
that that's a complete myth, and I can tell you that probably from my own experience with this process as well. So, what's your reaction to
Definitely.
that statement?
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes kids might have a B or two, especially earlier in their,
Hmm.
career in high school. I've had kids who've gotten less than an A in a high level class like AP Chem, something like that. Again, just like you would tell a college, you might want to give an explanation. The average student admitted to an academy is a 3.89 unweighted, right? So almost perfect. There's plenty of kids with a weighted, 4 or 5 GPAs, but
Right.
just having a 4 or 5 is not going to get you in. The average ACT is kind of around a 28 or the SAT equivalent, but is a 28 getting you in? Not really. Most with the ACT are well into the 30s. So, think about that's just the average, and that's going to include kids from under-resourced schools. That's going to include people coming from active duty. That's going to have kids, who have coaches and tutors too.
Right. Well, and,
Mhm.
and the last big myth is, and I really think we've already covered this a bit, but helping families understand that if you don't get into a military service academy, there are lots of other options if you were wanting to serve in the military. It's just that the military service academies are literally the top, whatever, 1, 2%. Like it's really, really small amount of kids. And there are definitely other military options for families, whether that's ROTC or the reserves, or I mean, there's
Senior
lots to
military
play.
colleges.
Yeah.
the Guard. And people can also, as they're in college, senior year, if you're at a civilian college, you can apply for officer training school, officer commissioning school, different names for different branches.
Yeah.
They're going to fill the shortfalls for that year. So what the Academy and ROTC didn't commission, that's what they're going to have that need for. So STEM and like aviation qualified, that's always going to help people too if your branch has aviation. But no, always have a plan B. And again, if you're in ROTC, you can join, generally freshman, sophomore year. The earlier, the better.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, I appreciate all of the tips and advice that you've given throughout this episode on military service academies. I did want to give you a little bit of a soapbox time before we wrap up for today and let you share some words of wisdom with our listeners and our watchers.
Sure. So I would say, as we talked about, an academy is an intense experience, right? It's an immersive experience. It's a great honor and privilege, but you're working hard. So you are giving away freedom, you're giving away time, you're giving away a typical experience. So hard to get into, hard to be there, but also great opportunities and challenges. It has to be something you want 110%. You can't go because your girlfriend wants you to go, or because your dad was career military, or because your parents won't pay for college. There are other ways to pay. So you got to have the right motivation. Kids, again, need to have that plan B, not give up, or that plan C or D, as we were saying. They need to think outside the box, like, oh, it's not Coast Guard or nothing. They should definitely have that. And they should seek help from people. It doesn't have to be me. It could be a school counselor. It could be cadets or midshipmen at the academy. It could be siblings and friends or mentors. But like, they have to do the work. Their mom or dad, it's usually the moms, sorry, moms, that are trying to call, the medical people on behalf of the student. They should sit there with the student. Like, I know their students are busy. I know it's not their time zone, but let's call, let's email together. The student needs to talk to the congressional office. The student needs to take the lead with these interviews. And I think the other area that sometimes drives me a little crazy is the kids don't like the waiting, because it could be a really long process. I could be done with all my military things in September and not find out till like April 25th. And I have had that happen. But sometimes the parents are like, the suspense is killing me. I can't stand it. And I'm like, it is only January 3rd. You've got many more months of this. So, we can't live through our kids. We got to support and encourage them, but you got to kind of keep that panic and worry, to yourself, and just, focus on, this is our last year with our child, most likely at home, and make the most of it. And then also be optimistic and know things happen as they're supposed to. Sometimes kids do apply a second time. More people get in the second time. And some of those are those prep school kids and foundation and ROTC kids. I've had kids, a few, that have applied 3 times, and they're now about to commission or already commissioned officers. So if you really want something, don't give up easily. But, also, if there's another path, feel free to take it. And there's also so many other ways to serve. It could be in government service. It could be a civilian with the military. It could be in law enforcement. It could be 3-letter agencies. It could be teaching. So there's a lot of ways to get back. So just kind of, be open and see where that path leads.
Lisa, super appreciative of you. That's some great advice. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you've said. Thank you for spending some time with me today and helping families learn a little bit more about the military service academies and all of the options that are out there that they should consider.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
Well, folks, thanks for listening to the Don't Chuck It Up podcast. Subscribe for more college admissions guidance, and don't forget, I will be back next week. But until then, don't chuck it up.
Don't chuck